Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of We Are Atheists. If this is your first time tuning in, We Are Atheists is a show that allows atheists and theists the opportunity to have conversations about what they believe, why they believe it, and really get to the bottom of any discussion. We'll take we'll take topics ranging anywhere from the Great Debate to politics, gooks, goblins, whatever. But I want to discuss what you believe and why. If that's a supernatural belief, that's even better. But this show isn't entirely about debate, and it's also about education as well, but primarily this is a platform for fellow atheist activists, such as myself, to promote the positive that is atheism, what benefits the atheist community provide for its environment and so forth. And as such, this show, We Are Atheists, is run entirely by volunteers from Free Thought Fort Wayne Incorporated, like myself. My name is Caleb Sitman. I'm the co-host and producer for We Are Atheists. Today is December 13, 2018, and I am joined today by a very special guest, Jim Helton. Jim Helton is the national field organizer and co-founder for Tri-State Free Thinkers. He is one of the most prominent atheist humanist activists out there today. Those of you who follow the show might remember that we had Jim on several months ago. I believe it was late August, if I'm not mistaken. But I had ran into Jim. Jim was the national field organizer, or excuse me, Jim had organized the Ark Encounter protests last year, and he was a speaker as well. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to shake his hand, get to know the man, and invited him on the show. So on that note, I just wanted to introduce Jim. Jim, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. My pleasure. I couldn't be happier for having you on yet again. It's a privilege and an honor. So I have you on primarily today to give you an opportunity to promote your What is an Atheist Issue seminar that Free Thought Fort Wayne is sponsoring for you. For those who don't know, Jim Helton will be hosting a lecture on what is an atheist issue. This will be happening on December 17th at 6:30 p.m. at the Tecumseh Allen County Public Library Branch, 1411 East State Boulevard, Fort Wayne, Indiana. So this is actually, this piqued my interest the last time that we had a show. I had mentioned your show, or excuse me, your seminar on the last episode. And one thing that really strikes me is the fact that this seems to be exactly in line with what this show is all about. We like to discuss atheist issues and promote the positive that atheism can produce for the greater community. So if you don't mind, I'd actually like to go ahead and get started with a couple of prepared questions, if you don't mind, unless you had something that you'd like to prime us with.
No, I'll let you go right into your questions.
Excellent. So honestly, again, the topic of your seminar is what is an atheist issue, and I'll let you discuss it I'll let you discuss as much about that as you like. But in my mind, the most pressing issue for atheists generally is the need for destigmatization of being an atheist in the first place. Public perception is overwhelmingly powerful in the public square, for example, and the implicit stigma against atheists makes it difficult for any out-of-the-closet atheists to be taken at least as seriously as the theistic population at large. In my atheism, in my activism, these are the sort of issues that come to my mind when I think what is an atheist issue. So are these the sort of topics that you'll be covering during your lecture series?
Yeah, part of my job with American Atheists was, to redefine what is an atheist issue and what we go after, because what we saw was inaction across the country because people couldn't agree on what an atheist issue was. While the community at large agreed, hey, we should remove 10 commandments from courthouses and we should stop prayers in schools by teachers and remove Bibles and those things. But when it came to things like abortion, LGBTQ issues, dying with dignity, all these other issues, sex education, that the movement was fairly divided. And that what we saw, and especially if you go online, like anytime we do a post about hey, we were at Pride or we did this thing, people are like, that's not an atheist issue. I thought you were American atheist. And so we had to set clear definitions, and that was the first thing we did of what is an atheist issue. The byproduct, what people don't understand is, and I can get into those definitions in a minute, is by doing these and by doing the actions related to these definitions, it is one of the best ways to normalize atheism by actually getting involved in your community and upholding the separation of religion and government. It's just not the way people think. It's an after effect and a byproduct of all the activism and work we're doing, and we found it to be one of the most productive ways to normalize atheism.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, honestly, in my experience, the issue of atheism versus theism and its relationship with politics usually comes up, like at work, for example. Somebody will say something that I would construe as ignorant, mostly, which is usually the only time I bring this sort of thing up at work. And when we get to the bottom of it, yeah, you'll end up coming to realize that it's generally a theistic notion that propels them in that direction, whatever it happens to be. If we're generally opposed on an issue, I find that it's religion that is driving that person towards that response, at least in the political dimension, in the political sphere. I had a question here that I wanted to ask you as well that was on that topic. Excuse me for just one moment here. Where was that? Okay, so in that case, what are your views on the relationship between atheism and theism versus politics? Both, let's just stick here locally and in the United States. I mean, in your experience, do you feel that these are relevant issues to even be discussing in the political realm?
Absolutely. Well, American Atheists is a nonprofit. We don't endorse candidates. And that's a misconception when I talk to groups around the country, like, oh, we're a nonprofit, we can't get involved in politics. No, you're absolutely allowed to. But what you can't do is endorse candidates. But you can talk to candidates about issues that are important to you and our community. And not only can you should. Mm-hmm. And while we've been fighting for the separation of religion and government through prayers and Bibles, and I'm not saying we should stop doing that. We absolutely should continue doing that. But the religious right has been killing us on all of our equal rights issues and all these other issues and social justice issues, and we haven't been in that space to stop them. And we absolutely need to be in the space where religion is posing their views, which are often not evidence-based solutions and are often harmful to the general public. We must be in that space demanding evidence-based solutions. Evidence-based
solutions, as a matter of fact. That's, science, I'm going to actually skip ahead a bit here as well. Let me just be honest with you. I attempted to phrase these questions in some semblance of an order, but I knew that this would end up going all over the place. So forgive me. I'm actually relatively new at this interviewing process still. Honestly, okay, here we go. So, over the course of my career as an atheist activist, I found myself more often than not having to defend things like evolution as a fact of science. Mm-hmm. And I often find that the way that theists approach this topic is to ostensibly just ignore the science and preach an anti-science worldview. And in fact, in my mind, I would argue that although many theists accept science for what it is, religion itself seems to be the greatest anti-science force in terms of sheer power and persuasion. So my question for you, short of deconverting such theists into atheists, what can or should the atheist communities do to combat, these anti-science, ignorant, and vitriol?
Well, the approach that I am taking, and I'm not saying we shouldn't engage in debate, and street epistemology is a great way to do that, of not attacking the people or not attacking their beliefs, but attacking their methodology. But what I am doing, and the movement that we are doing, is going after policy not only at the state level, but going all the way down to school boards and city councils, and making sure their policy is good to protect the kids of the future, that they're being taught proper science. So the people that I'm going after are teachers, school board members, principals, superintendents. I'm not engaging so much in the debate with the creationists themselves, but the policymakers that are educating our children in our schools. That's where that is my target. That is who I'm going after.
It sounds like you're in line with most of the atheist activists that I would follow. And I would agree. In fact, this goes just beyond, excuse me, political affiliations and atheism and theism as well. I mean, just getting things like, for example, I work, I shouldn't say, but where I work, some of the employees have pensions, but those that got hired in after a certain point, we're not getting pensions. And short of changing legislation, or short of getting certain people into government positions that would benefit us greatly, we're not getting those pensions back. So we have to consider alternative ways to survive after retirement. My point being that if you want to enact change, the only real way to get it done is in politics. It's just a fact that I don't think we can escape. And one thing that I wanted to ask you as an organizer, on these grounds, with only and mind you, I'm coming at you, I know you said that you guys had a very particular definition of atheism and what is an atheist issue, but I wanted to kind of gauge your approach. So with only a common lack of belief that unifies all atheists, because that's really the only thing that all atheists have in common, is a lack of belief in God or gods, are there some inherent difficulties or even potential dangers present when you're trying to get everyone to march in the same direction? I mean, what does your experience tell you, especially as the national field organizer for Tri-State Free Thinkers?
You've always heard the argument, trying to herd atheists is like herding cats. I'm very good at herding cats. and instead of, and the approach we take, and I think we should just get into the definitions and you can see how effective this is, instead of having individual debate about individual issues. While the evolution, most, atheists pretty much agree on that. That's not controversial. But what's more controversial in the atheist community, just go online to Facebook and say, is an abortion an atheist issue? And just watch the comments go nuts. Mm-hmm. And so instead of engaging in individual issues, we ask three questions. If I'm going to get involved and work with our affiliates and our directors at a grassroots level, I ask three questions. And if it meets any one of those three criteria, then I'm involved as an atheist issue. And you already mentioned one of them. Here's the first one. The first question we ask is, who's behind the issue? Is it religion? If religion is driving the bus, then we must be there. And if you looked at all those issues I mentioned, like abortion, LGBT, dying with dignity, like if you take religion out of this equation, they all instantly go away. We're not having these debates whatsoever on this issue. This is religion, using its dogma to dictate policy. The second question we ask is religion being used as an excuse to discriminate? And this is so apparent, especially when it comes to, transgender rights, LGBTQ, the whole spectrum. People are literally saying, I have a right to discriminate against these people. And they're using the same excuses we did in the civil rights movement back in the 50s of, they want an excuse to discriminate. So if the answer is yes to that, then this is an atheist issue. Those were the two definitions when I was hired that I brought to American Atheists to say, hey, these are the questions we should ask. Now, a third one, this third definition evolved over this year. And, it basically says that if religion is offered as the answer instead of an evidence-based solution, we should be involved. So never in a million years when I was hired did I think that guns and the weather would be an atheist issue. I was like, no, but they have become in the political spectrum. And so let me give you a couple examples. Instead of working on climate change and how we can help it, we have politicians saying if we want to stop hurricanes, we need to ban the gays and abortion. Damn it, you just made this an atheist issue by bringing, nonsense into this. And not only should we respond, we must respond. And they don't care if somebody from New Jersey, from American Atheists, says something. But if we have a local group and local people in that community where this idiot says this thing, they must call them out locally. And that's what we're trying to encourage people to do. And the next one is, if you want to divide a movement, there's no better way to do it than talk about guns. I mean, I could probably divide the room in half instantly if you want to bring up guns. And so, but let me talk about guns anyway. If you have this element, when they had the Florida shooting, senators openly admitted, hey, we have a problem, kids are getting shot. The argument wasn't, do we have a problem? They openly admitted, hey, there's a problem, kids are dying. And so they came up with two solutions. The only thing that can keep students safe is thoughts and prayers. And the second solution was forcing in God we trust in every classroom to keep students safe. Now, I don't care if you're for guns or against guns. That isn't the argument. But can we all agree thoughts and prayers won't keep students safe? Can we agree that, in God we trust posters aren't going to keep students safe? We need evidence-based solutions. So anytime our politicians go to supernatural and BS, we need to call them out and demand evidence-based solutions as atheists, because they're using religion as the solution, and that's not helpful whatsoever.
So I understand the need to combat non-evidence-based and faith-based propositions, in God we trust and so forth. But are you, as an atheist activist, offering alternatives? For example, in the case of guns and school shootings, like panic rooms or something like that? Or are you simply just taking a step back from actually making a position on a positive effect and just saying we should negate this effect?
So it depends on the issue. Like, I'm not going down the rabbit hole and offering the solution of what we should do for guns. It's a complicated issue. But whatever we decide, if our politicians are going to enact legislation, it needs to be evidence-based. Mm-hmm. Now, I know because of laws and how hard it is to track guns, that can be a challenge. So I'm not going out there and saying, hey, this is clearly what should be done. I'm just saying, if you're going to do some legislation on guns, it should be evidence-based, not religious-based. So, but on other issues are way more clear, like on sex education. There are only 17 states that require sex ed to be medically and scientifically accurate. There's only 8 states that require consent. Churches are teaching this in public school. They told my son condoms had a 35% failure rate not to use them. He raised his hand and said it's only 2% if you would teach me how to use them. They told my daughter she had sex before marriage, she was no better than pre-chewed chewing gum. Then she had to write an essay what it meant about pre-chewed chewing gum. We are having a church-based program. Now here, it's very clear. There's plenty of studies, plenty of evidence that comprehensive sex ed must be medically and scientifically accurate. It should be gender neutral. It should have sexual orientation and gender identity. These things are very clear. So we're actually proposing a solution when it comes to sex ed. And we are so good at it, we're now working with health departments, Planned Parenthood, on training people of how to get sex ed into schools because we've had so much success at it at a local level.
That's incredible. All right. Well, those 3 points they're pretty solid. I'll just go ahead and reiterate what I have here. Number 1, who's behind the issue? Are they religious or religion in general? 2, is religion being used as an excuse to discriminate? And 3, if religion offers an answer as opposed to an evidence-based answer.
Yes, I mean, that's it. And if the answer is yes to any one of those 3 things, then we must be in that space. And we must organize around that to take on that issue. And it works. It's very effective when we do. People argue that, hey, I see in God We Trust bumper stickers and I see all these things. I've never removed one of those things because it's our national motto. And there's certain things with, unfortunately, the way they are. But any school I've worked with, any city that I'm working with ahead of time, proactively, guess what? They've never put one of those up.
Yeah.
Because they understand and respect our position. The other thing is, while we talked about, remember normalizing atheism?
Oh, yeah.
Guess what? Sex education, 85% of parents and students want proper sex ed taught. We win this battle, it's popular. LGBTQ, the majority of all Americans support LGBTQ issues. Even abortion, the majority of Americans support women's access to safe and legal abortion. Mm-hmm. These issues are popular. So when we do this action and we stand up for equal rights and we stand up for other people's rights who are being discriminated because of religion, and we do this for equality, we normalize atheism when people look at us and see us. It's an amazing effect. And when we work with these school boards, we work with the city councils, we work with state legislators, it also goes into keeping separation of religion and government because they realize our position, they're in contact with us, they become our allies, and it makes a big impact instead of this adversarial position where we're always sending lawsuits and letters, and they consider us an adversary. Well, it is a different approach, but it's worked very, very well for us.
Well, on that note, speaking of approaches, considering the type of activism that you're involved with, I'm extremely curious about what your personal views on the use of ridicule against religion are. I mean, for example, there's one podcaster who goes by the name of No Illusions. Fantastic podcaster. Yep. He puts together these very articulate, well thought out diatribes, which ruthlessly tear apart religion. But if you are religious, it might easily come across as extremely distasteful. Do you believe that these sort of tactics are useful insofar as reaching out to theists, or I mean,
So
are these?
here's the thing. I think there's a couple things that I think people make the mistake on. Is we often argue which is the best way to do something, and often what I'm going to say is we need to do it all. There's a time and a place to be offensive, funny, and ridicule. There's a time and a place for humor. There's a time and a place to be warm and fuzzy and nice and not do any of those things. There's a time to be articulate and scientific. All these approaches work on different people. The other thing I think people make the mistake on is you have to know your target. Like, for example, you're talking to the guy who put up Genocide and Incest Park in front of the Ark Encounter. Now, was I trying to appeal to creationists and not to come? No, that wasn't my target. My target was the media, and my target was firebrand atheists.
Yes.
And why was I looking for firebrand atheists for that action? Because those are the people running groups around the country. You know, we've got multiple affiliates, multiple directors, multiple board members. The thing was extremely successful. That was my target. I didn't care if I pissed off theists. That wasn't my goal. Now, when I was trying to normalize atheism with theists, I was feeding the homeless with them. I was building houses with them. I was doing good community work with them because they were my target. So people like No Illusion, he absolutely should keep doing what he's doing. He's doing great work.
Absolutely.
But you have to know who he's appealing to, and he's appealing to a certain type of people that's very effective. And if you want to appeal to different type of people, you would use a different podcaster or different speaker based on what that is.
Absolutely. In fact, to be fair, now, mind you, I was trying to ride the line, toe the line between devil's advocate and advocate on that, on some of these questions. But No Illusions actually put together a lecture specifically centered around this question, because he's been approached with this question a lot. And it's very well thought out, it's very clear cut, and he presents the case that although being, using this sort of vitriol and satire that he uses, most theists that are listening won't remember as much. They will remember it longer, and it will have a deeper impact on them. And that's ostensibly the abstract. That's the summary of his argument there. And I absolutely agree with him. I mean, if you look at the data, that's what it suggests. So you're absolutely right again. I mean, these sort of tactics have their place for sure. So in line with tactics and organization, I thought of a question I wanted to ask you, and this one really interested me. Do you feel that it's more practical to market your atheist agenda, if it's fair to call it that, which I would assume, as one that promotes the importance of the atheist community, quote unquote, as especially important, or one that promotes the knowledge that each atheist is a unique gem as especially important? If you would, and as a bonus here, if you would respond by saying that both are equally important, how would you approach balancing this sort of conundrum?
What was the second part?
One that promotes the knowledge that each atheist is a special, unique gem, responsible for their own consequences, etc.
Yeah. So I don't know if this will answer your question, but this is my approach when I take an issue. So if I go to an atheist group or a humanist group where I am preaching to the choir, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. I go in there with my 3 definitions of what an atheist issue is. I go in there with specific tasks that these groups locally can engage in to make a difference in their community. And I say to all of them, these are atheist issues. Like, I am spouting these are atheist issues. When I get those groups to go out into the public, to engage their schools, engage their council, goes and protest. For example, if I go into a school, I say, I'm Jim Helton with American Atheists, never afraid to use the word atheist. But after that, I never say the word atheist again. I am going out at this as an equal rights issue, and all my language changes as this is an equal rights issue. I never mention religion, because if it's atheist versus religion in the public eye, we're going to lose. I use the words of equality, and these people are being discriminated against, and that is well received, and I don't make it about religion, even if they bring it up. Even if they bring it up, I don't bite, I don't go there. So I think we need to know, from a marketing point of view, are we talking to our base or are we talking to the public? And trying to build coalitions or allies. And that's usually what I'm doing in public, is trying to build coalition partners that aren't necessarily atheists. And I'm trying to get theists to agree with me on an issue. And I have time and time again.
Okay. Well, to be honest, you've answered the vast majority of my questions. I'm gonna, I do have one here that I fielded in advance as well. I want to talk a bit about, the history of secularism a bit. Are you familiar with the history of secularism?
That would
at
not
least
be
of
my
the
area of
American-
expertise.
Not particularly. Okay. Well, are you aware of any movements or programs that are attempting to promote a more secular-based and quote-unquote accurate version of history? I'm sure you're well aware, but there does exist a rather skewed version of history where abominable acts are often blamed on secularism, i.e. Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot.
Hitler was Catholic, by the way, but do you
Yes, yes, thank you. Or, you'll often find that secular individuals are forgotten or trivialized. A. Philip Randolph, for example, he was a great black secularist who marched with Dr. King. He was an organizer, much like yourself, and he helped greatly with the civil rights movement, but he's pretty much forgotten to history. I mean, you have to specifically be looking for him or be in certain circles to even hear the name. Are you aware of any, and I ask you because you seem to be a bit higher up the food chain than I am in the atheist activist realm, but do you know of any movements or programs that are attempting to promote a more accurate version of history?
I mean, there's some really good books where people talk history. One of the ones is fascinating. It's From Eve to Evolution, where they talk about all the women in the women's rights movement that you've never heard of. That came to atheism by realizing the Bible and Adam and Eve story is why women are not treated equally. And then the movement split because they were like, no, it's not the Bible's fault. It's not religion's fault. Like, this is a conclusion the women came to. So a lot of women that started this women's rights movement were like, hey, wait a minute. They didn't go into it that way, but when they really got to the root of it, like, religion's the problem, and it split. So there's a lot of good books out there. There's a lot of good research out there, on these things. But that's not my particular, like I said, area of expertise. As far as there's other organizations that focus on the educational piece, like a CFI, Center for Inquiry, that, part of the Dawkins Foundation, things of that nature, that are more on that educational piece. My piece is focusing on, if you're unhappy in the world and you're pissed off, like, do you feel your representatives are representing you? Does your school board represent your values? What about your city council, your state legislators? And if it's no, are you just drinking beer and bitch about religion, or would you like to do something about it? And if we can give you the tools and resources, we want you to be able to make change in your community, no matter what state, what city. And I live in between the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter. So if I can do it here in Kentucky, and I've done it in other states, I know people can do it in their state, even Indiana.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would agree that completely, first of all, but I would I would add, like I said before, over the course of my career as an atheist activist, I have to constantly defend evolution as a scientific fact. And as I'd mentioned, I can't talk about this enough in my mind that I still, to this day, I'm convinced, absolutely convinced, that the most potent force that is opposed to science in the world today is religion. And the biggest hurdle that we have in overcoming pretty much every obstacle we can think of is merely the fact that we don't have a good enough understanding of whatever it is we're trying to figure out. Guess what? Good science comes from secularism, essentially. I mean, you can't really do good science. You can't do good science if you're going to be instilling faith-based paradigms and things of this nature. But anyway, Jim, I was wondering, it looks like my audience is getting a bit antsy. Would you mind sticking around for a little bit and answering a couple of the audience questions?
Yeah, I just want to comment on one thing. Yeah. Well, I think religion's the biggest opponent to a lot of our equal rights issues. But we also, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but it's at least worth mentioning. So's money in politics. So's people, when it comes to climate. While there's a religious opposition to it, there's also a profit motive on some of these things of why there's anti-science as well.
Yeah.
But, we fight what we know, and I know I can fight against religion. So I'm happy to open up if people have some questions or want to jump in. I'm happy to take them.
Conversation starter, I agree. And in fact, it's not even, I'll even go a step above that. I was just listening to, I'm an adamant listener of Joe Rogan's podcast. Not that I learn about the world around me through Joe, but he comes up with a lot of interesting stuff that leads me down a lot of deep, dark rabbit holes. But he was discussing with a guest today about how the search engines and the algorithms that Google uses to help determine what it thinks that you want to search for. Or it might have been Facebook, come to think of it. But whatever the case was, it
Google
became...
does the same.
I'm sorry?
Google does that. Yeah.
Okay.
Facebook, I think it does too.
In one of the... there was an incident where for a while, Jew haters came up as... those two words, Jew haters, came up as a recommended topic, like a hotkey. Oh gosh, I can't think of the language.
Trending topic.
Yes, because and people were absolutely befuddled. They're like, how and why would Google do that? Well, it's not Google doing that. It's purely the input by everyday people that's doing that. And if everyday people weren't constantly searching up things that pertain to Jew hating, then it wouldn't have come up in the first place. So it wasn't necessarily money or power or prestige or anything like that. It's just the technology itself, the machine. So I can understand having a healthy respect and a healthy dose of, like a dash of the fear of what technology could rot, for sure. I mean, that in this particular example, I can't remember exactly how it panned out, but in the grand scheme, this affected a single person especially hard.
Well,
and
Google was actually on a hearing where they were interviewing the CEO of Google. He was testifying, and the politicians are complaining that they Google their name and Nazi comes up, all this bad press comes up, and they were just pounding him on it. And then one of the politicians goes, "Hey, if you don't want bad press, stop doing bad things. You know, if you want good press, do good things. The reason you're associated with Nazis is because you're doing Nazi things."
Yes.
Like,
this is exactly what I was talking about. Yeah.
Google mentioned that they had this idea, and they admitted it was problematic. But if they ever figure it out, I think it changes the world. And instead of doing search results by what they think we want, which I think is a horrible idea, by the way, is doing it by factually based. So when you type in evolution or type in something to learn, the Creation Museum shows up on page 500,000. Like, you know, science history, that their search engine is then based on facts and evidence and verified, trustworthy sites. Yeah. This is a game changer if the internet does that. Now, it does become problematic for smaller sites and other things, and they admit it, like, hey, if we, you know, here's the problems we would have to work out. But they discussed this openly years ago, and I think it changes the world if we go to a search model like that versus, oh, you know, you're just constantly in your bubble of this is what I want to hear with no opposing view.
Right. It's this crazy balancing act that we've been trying to figure out for a while now. And, you know, at first, you know, I've done a couple of different episodes on the impact of social media and popular culture and things like that. And, you know, there's a lot of different factors that come into play when you want to talk about what feeds the machine, what keeps people coming back and making the clicks. Because that's really all Facebook cares about primarily are clicks. They just want you to click on ads and that's it. The same with pretty much any other enterprise that exists on the internet these days. I mean, primarily all they're really looking for is clicks and how long they can keep you glued to that image, whatever it happens to be, a movie or whatever. And anyway, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm going to get really sidetracked tangent on this. I don't want to lose our audience here because I'll drop down a deep, dark rabbit hole on those sort of topics. So if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and just take some questions from the audience. So for those of you who happen to be watching live on Facebook, now is a great time. If you want to try to call in, we can make that work as well. We can have you up live on FaceTime. I am on today with special guest Jim Helton. He is the National Field Organizer and co-founder for the Tri-State Free Thinkers. Let's see. So we have a couple of questions here in the comments already. I apologize if some of these questions are a bit ignorant or stupid. I haven't fielded these. So let's see here. First one up. Let's see. I'm guessing I don't want to read his. Okay, so this here. I thought I saw one a little bit ago. Oh, here we go. This is the first one that's an actual question. Do you think atheists tend to flock towards socialist methods as opposed to free enterprise and individual rights? That's the question. Michael, if you're still in the chat, I would hope that you could clarify on that, because you did say down here that this question, that particular question, is related to inherent belief, but I still don't quite follow. Do you happen to follow with that one, Jim? Do you think that atheists...
So a common thing is, when we're talking about these issues and you're talking about groups is, people say, what about, are there a lot of atheists seem to be, Democrats or, or democratic socialists. And, we have a lot of libertarian atheists and there's Republican atheists and, and Tea Party and American Atheist doesn't take sides on those issues. Like what we're saying is this isn't a conservative or a liberal issue. Is religion here, and it doesn't matter where you are on that spectrum. Okay, this is what we're trying to do. It doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative. What happens though, and if we're having an honest conversation, is the Republican Party and the Christian right are basically married at this point, and it makes it really hard for atheists when a lot of people go to the polls. We need to separate religion and government. I would love when I go to vote to have a choice, but a lot of the perception is there. But that's not always true as well. Like in Kentucky, a Democrat proposed to discriminate against transgender people. So that's not always the case as well. And I think when it comes to a lot of these issues,
okay,
just to clarify, the religious right is kind of speaking through the Republican Party sometimes and other people, and so that's where I think that politics gets caught up in there. If that explains it.
Yeah, no, I think that you answered the question beautifully. No offense, Michael, that I just feel like it was a poorly phrased question. But Michael did add here that he says that his thoughts were more left-wing grounded in materialism, where natural rights is more of a religious-based concept. So I think that he's more or less leaning towards a moral argument that says that because we are atheists, our opinion about XYZ ought to be this, whatever the case might be. And I think that first, Michael, what I would say to that is that is a very misinformed way of looking at what atheism even is. You can't look at atheist A through Z, any number of atheists, and know anything else about them if all that you know about them is the fact that they are an atheist. That's it. The atheism pertains to a single issue. Do you or do you not believe, not know, or claim to know, do you believe that a God exists? And that is it. So, do atheists tend to lean more towards one way or the other? I would most definitely say yes, but that is because we have, as you had mentioned in there, a materialistic view of the world. Yes, and that does affect how we view politics and ethics and morality. But the great thing about secular views is we have evidence-based views, and that's where I think our strengths lie.
And let me speak individually, and not any of the organizations I represent on this next statement. Is you said something key there. We need evidence-based solutions, meaning if a socialist agenda item is going to help people, and we have facts and evidence like Medicare for all is better and it's evidence-based, then yes, that socialist alternative looks good. If there's other things where those socialist things don't work and it's better to have capitalism than in private industry, then yes, let's go that. It is not all one way or all the other. We can look at evidence-based solutions to say, hey, what have other states done? What have other countries done? And then based on the evidence, hey, that's what we should do. That's the way I personally look at the world, not in a, I'm in this camp or this camp. I'm truly an evidence-based person on all things. At least I try to be.
Okay, well, we have another question here. It says, if God is considered supernatural and supernatural is defined as not detectable by science, is God belief against science? Well, to be blunt, yes. Insofar as if you accept that there is a God based on the evidence, then you are in fact not utilizing science. I can say that. I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's no evidence for God. So using the scientific method, there's no evidence for God. And I've heard the arguments of also to say, hey, well, science can't detect the supernatural, so therefore. But you know what? While I disagree with that argument on, we can test the results. So, for example, if you're saying prayer works, and we can't say, well, we can't explain prayer scientifically, we could test the results, though, if prayer works, and we've tested it. Does prayer work? So science may not be able to explain how it works, but does it work? Does this have an impact? And we've tested this time and time again, and nothing fails like prayer. You know, the famous saying goes. It doesn't work, so we know it doesn't work. So we could test the effects of supernatural things to know, yeah, that's just bogus. And that's what science can do. And I think that's where people, you know, go astray on this issue.
Yeah, I've gotten really deep down this rabbit hole. I mean, honestly, I'm convinced that when it comes to issues like this, that it boils down to one of two perspectives. Either you think that everything is built from the bottom up in some sort of materialistic fashion, or that everything was constructed from the top down. And there doesn't really, I mean, once you get down to the nitty-gritty, there doesn't really seem to be a middle ground. Short of I don't know, but I mean, if you take a hard stance on something, that tends to be what the case is. And as you were mentioning earlier today, you know, about the firebrand atheists, you know, there's a good reason to market for firebrands and very vocal people, because those tend to be the people that are willing to put the boots on and go marching. And this applies in all directions. I mean, it's just a simple fact of life. So what you tend to find is that the most aggressive people with the most strong opinions tend to be the ones on the front lines, and that's where you see them clashing, butting heads.
But if you want to build a true community, you need the humanists, you need the critical thinkers, the skeptics, the free thinkers. Like, you need all of the above, and I think that's what we're lacking in the atheist community. A lot of these groups are one or the other. Like, they're just humanists, or they're just firebrands, or they're just, you know, going to skeptics meetings. Like, if we want to build true communities and build a movement, and that's kind of the other part of the work I do, is while we want all these groups to get activism, if they don't have a strong foundation to build a community, then it doesn't matter how great my programs are if they're not able to implement them. And we need to build strong communities first that gives them the resources, the framework, and the foundation. Then we can go after any issues. And we need to appeal to a wide range of people and not just one.
Okay. Well, Jim, I'm going to attempt to get Michael on the line with us. Bear with me for just a moment. I am honestly not entirely sure how this is going to work out. The last time that oh, actually, yeah, this should work just fine. I apologize. Michael, how you doing, brother? Can you hear me? Yeah, one moment, please. Just give me one moment. We need to adjust something in here. Do you happen to have a headset that you can put on?
I got a headset on.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess this is just going to be a problem. Are you hearing an echo on your end, or does it sound okay to you? When you talk,
no,
do you hear
fine.
an echo? What about you, Jim? Does it sound okay to you?
It's a little loud.
It's a bit loud?
That's all right. We'll get through it.
Okay. So, Michael, what are your concerns or questions today? You're talking with myself and Jim Helton.
Yeah, I was just kind of watching, and I mean, you seemed a little bit more rational than most of the atheists that I come across, so I wanted to field some of the questions that I ask most atheists when I talk to them. Like, to clarify, I'm not a Christian. I'm kind of an agnostic theist. I kind of believe in a non-personal God, but I noticed things. I'm very big into political philosophy, and I see a lot of atheists coasting up to like the socialist and even to the communist, as wild as that is in this day and age. And I have my reasons for this, and obviously atheists are materialists. They believe in everything observed and et cetera. Don't need to get
okay, real quick, can I pause you now, just briefly?
Yeah.
So you're making a distinction here, and I just want to get some clarification. So are you suggesting that it is merely a fact, in your mind anyway, that atheists tend to lean towards more socialist concepts and ideals far more often than theists do? And are you okay? And are you using this observation as some sort of proof or disproof for God? I mean, you did mention that you were a theist. And I'm trying to, honestly, my point in being here and talking with people who believe is to try to determine why they believe what they believe and to figure out whether or not they have good reasons for that.
Yeah.
So,
Well, my belief is simple. It's you know, the basic first cause argument, where it's like, you know, one thing happens to another. I mean, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a Christian. I'm not into the whole personal God thing. I just think that there's something out there that created everything.
why?
But I digress.
Okay.
Like I was saying with the socialist thing, you know, it's more of an observation, and it's an observation that's not just noticing like who is saying what and what they, you know, call themselves or whatever.
What's the
It's
impact
also
of this
in the
observation
philosophy.
to you as a person? Like, what? This is your observation. How does it impact you personally? What are you getting at with this observation?
Well, I mean, personally, I am more in the capitalist realm. I think socialism is a horrible idea. Central planning of economy hasn't worked in the past, so I guess scientifically it's not really a great way of going about things. You have a couple welfare states that rely on capitalism that do pretty well in the Norwegian countries, but you know that's not really the same thing. But like I was saying, you know, socialism is grounded in materialism, and you know, as I was saying in the comments, natural rights.
Michael,
Okay.
I'm sorry, briefly. Jim, are you, how's your politics? Are you up to speed on politics pretty well?
Yeah, I am, but I don't know what relevance this has.
Yeah,
like,
see,
I don't know where this is going.
Okay.
Like, what
That's
is
why I
your
wanted to ask
specific
you.
question? Like,
Well,
what is your
we can change
specific
the
question?
subject. We can talk about something else. If, you know.
Sure. You know, as you know, I like to promote secular worldviews. You say that you are, in fact, a deist of some sort. You believe in a creator of some sort. Why?
Yeah, I guess deist is a good way to. I mean, why not?
Well, lack of evidence for one. That's a good start. There's no reason to make the assumption to begin with.
Oh, yeah, but there's also no. I mean, I was an atheist on this whole like, oh, there's no evidence, but then, you know, there's probably not evidence that there's no God either. So.
Well, that's because it is an
I'm more
unfalsifiable position. Do you agree or disagree that God is
Well,
unfalsifiable? The concept, anyway. At least, well, let's take a half a step back because, generally speaking, I think most
Repeat
people would
that
agree to
one?
that. What are you defining as this God? Do you have a definition? Do you have an understand? Do you even know what it is you're talking about?
I lean more towards if you're familiar with Spinoza. I mean,
Okay.
I don't agree with everything that he says,
So you believe in a metaphorical
but
God?
I like his found. No, not necessarily. It's just a different form of it. He kind of takes the Cartesian substance and, you know, enhances it. It's
Well, the
a
Cartesian
really lot to
model
get into.
is quelched. There aren't. I don't. As far as I'm aware, there aren't any
I'm
serious
saying
philosophers
he takes
advocating.
the Cartesian concept of substance and kind of turns that into a God concept.
Okay,
if
so
you're familiar with
okay. So if I were to tell you that the Cartesian concepts have just failed miserably, there's just no way to validate them, and there's plenty of ways to disprove them, as a matter of fact. For example, the Cartesian model presumes that there is something outside, or there's something that the brain is either tuning into or that is manipulating the brain to produce consciousness. And there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that something like this ether of consciousness exists. And we have every reason to think that absolutely every process that we perceive and that we define as consciousness can be derived and defined as the functions of a working brain. So my challenge to you in this case would be, can you define any concept or can you describe anything about consciousness or the mind that we can show exists without a brain?
I mean, I'm not a neurologist, so I'm not a person to ask a brain question to.
Well, you see, that's the thing. You don't actually have to understand the particulars. You don't have to get real down into the nitty-gritty of neurology. This is a pretty simple.
I will say this. I think that there are some things that we just cannot figure out no matter how hard we try.
I agree.
And in that endless options of possibilities.
But let me jump in there.
Right.
Hold on, Bubba, real quick, if you don't mind, Michael.
Let me interrupt you real quick, because here's the big difference. When you say we can't explain or we can't understand, then the correct answer to that question is, I don't know. The correct answer isn't jumping to a supernatural because you can't explain it. That's the big issue. I don't know would be the correct answer there.
Right, but belief isn't a knowledge claim. I'm not saying I know God exists. I'm saying that, logically speaking, I believe that something created, like something must have been the start of creation in some way, shape, or form.
Yes, which would imply that you are more convinced than not, right? So the question at that point would, even if it were only 50.0000001, I mean, whatever the case might be, you are admitting that you are more convinced than not, which would imply that presumably you would have better reasons to believe it than not, that being the case. Otherwise, would you admit that this would be nothing more than wishful thinking?
I mean, not really, because my God's the God that I believe in isn't really a personal God. It doesn't really do anything.
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter.
The world exists whether God exists or not. So, everything still turns the same.
Right, but would you agree or disagree that if you believe a thing, given the fact that you have less reason to believe it than to believe it, that you're practicing wishful thinking?
Well, what do you mean less? Like I said, it's more of a logical.
No, like the evidence. It is if you can objectively say that it is less reasonable to presume X than it is, or excuse me, to presume that X is not true than it is to presume that X is true, and yet you still believe that X is true. Wouldn't this be akin to wishful thinking, at best?
Well, the term wishful thinking, I mean, that kind of puts a whole new extra layer onto it. Like, do I wish there was a God? I don't care whatsoever. I just think that there is. It's like I don't believe in a heaven or anything like that. So
are you saying that this is more of a heuristic for you?
What am I?
I mean, because that's fair. Would you suggest that your default position essentially is it just feels like there's a God, and that's where this belief is derived from?
I mean, yes, and that's kind of where I was going with my question on inherent belief, where there's a lot of people that claim, especially religious people, that there is an inherent belief in God in people.
All right, brother. Well, I apologize, brother. I gotta let you go, Michael. It was great having you on. I've been told that we have about a minute or so left in the show, so I want to go ahead and do our closing statements and everything. But I do want to thank you for participating. I think that this was, in fact, a useful engagement.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. It was great. Anytime. Come back again. Okay. Thank you, Jim, for for participating in that. Tolerating was a bit demeaning. You still with us, Jim?
Yeah, I'm still here.
All right. Well, we only have about a minute left in the show, so I wanted to throw it to you to go ahead and give the audience any information that you want to give them, Facebook pages, upcoming events, things like that. And then I'll go ahead and close it out.
You can go to atheist.org, see all the good things American Atheists do. Follow our Facebook page as well. I'm actually going to be in Columbus Friday night. I'm going to be in Cleveland Saturday. Sunday I'm going to be in Michigan, and then Monday I come back to Fort Wayne. So that's just this weekend, and then January I'll be in Florida. I'm traveling all over the country, talking to atheists, helping people get organized, and helping them do the things they want to do if they want to have an effect in their community.
All right. Well, on that note, oh darn it, I just lost it. I think it was December 17th. Was that correct? I just lost it.
Correct. 6:30.
Yes.
Yep, in Fort Wayne.
December 17th, 6:30, Tecumseh Branch Library. You can see Jim in person if you happen to be in Fort Wayne or in the local area. My name is Caleb Simon. I was joined today by a special guest, Jim Helton, the co-founder and national field organizer for the Tri-State Freethinkers. I want to thank everybody that participated in the group chat, and I'd also like to give a special thank you to Michael for calling in as well. As always, we are atheists, and I'll see you next time.